Before you get too far into actually using SharePoint, I think there are a few things that you might need to know. First of all, it's always a good idea to know what SharePoint is. It's also necessary to know how SharePoint is similar yet different from what you use now. You might want to know what you can do with SharePoint, as well as how SharePoint can help optimize your work. The first thing someone needs to know when they're tasked with learning something new is why they need to know it. If we all had nothing to do in our lives except further our own knowledge, this wouldn't be an issue. But because learning is often necessitated by the other things that we need to accomplish, learning just for the sake of knowledge is not usually in our list of reasons. In order to let us understand why we need SharePoint, we need to understand what it is. Now, we're not going to go into all of the details here, but in general, what is SharePoint so we can begin to understand how we can use it? Part of human nature is that we resist change. It's sad, but it just is true, and we should all admit it. We're comfortable doing what we've always done. There's nothing wrong with that, but knowing what the benefits are of changing are going to help us understand that the change we're being asked to make is more beneficial than our initial discomfort with the change. Have no fear, though. I always work very hard to let you know the similarities between your current methods and what you're learning that's new. That way, we can focus on the similarities rather than all of the differences. The good news is, even though SharePoint seems very different, it really is basically the same way we've been working with data and files in the past, just in a little bit different interface. Of course, there are other benefits that we'll get to, but basically, it should be very familiar once we explain it. Once we understand what it is, how we'll use it, how it's similar to what we've been doing, then we'll be able to more easily see and be willing to take on all of the wonderful things that we can accomplish using SharePoint. Okay, so what is SharePoint? In a word class, if I asked what Word was, the answer would probably come pretty quickly that it's a word processing program. For Excel, the answer would be that it's a spreadsheet. It's a little more difficult for a class, say, on Outlook. We might get answers including an email program and maybe even a calendar. Technically, Outlook is a personal information management system, or PIM, but that's really not our focus here. The point is, it gets even harder if I ask you what SharePoint is. That's because SharePoint isn't one thing. It's a collection of components and services. Let's see if we can narrow that down a bit to make it a little bit more clear. When we talk about the short list of what SharePoint is, we need to take them one at a time. First, SharePoint is a home page. More appropriately, it's an intranet or an internet site made up of web pages that display data. Wow, there actually was a lot in that one initial statement. The fact that it's a website is important because you can't just install SharePoint onto your computer and have it work. It has to be part of a more complex setup, including servers. But what is nice is that as a user of SharePoint, all you need to do is be able to know how to use a browser to view and use SharePoint. It's really that simple. Anyone with a browser and network access can then connect using a PC or a Mac or even a variety of tablets and mobile devices. Because it's a website, you don't need to have any special training. As long as you can click hyperlinks, use the back and next buttons, and click on an occasional OK or Save button, you'll be able to use SharePoint. Now, we're going to invest time during this entire series talking about all of the wonderful detailed features that SharePoint offers. But as far as usability goes, SharePoint is a website. One of the most beneficial features of SharePoint is that it provides a single central repository for all of the information that we need to keep track of. Instead of having data and files scattered around and amongst various network drives, external hard drives, and personal hard drives, it's all in one place. If your company has more than one location, it's a single central location, and files aren't duplicated between places either. This means it's easier and more efficient to share files. Instead of emailing copies to everyone and then having to manage all those copies, a single copy can be stored in SharePoint, and everyone, whether it's 2 people or 200, can all access that one file from there. With a single file, everyone can access it more collaboratively. That means we can work together, making it easier as well. Changes are made to a single file, and everyone can instantly see them. Copies don't need to be sent back and forth and combined together, and this is going to save time, energy, and reduce the possibility of errors. SharePoint's ability to manage and track changes to documents is often one of the primary reasons it's adopted by companies. Of course, none of this really matters if people can't find the files that they're looking for. One of the biggest challenges on the network today is simply finding where someone put that file. Did you know that the average worker spends more than 70 minutes each day looking for things on their computer? Did you know that even more sadly, that about 30% of the time they never find what they were looking for? That means that they wasted more than an hour of their day. And to make it even worse, if they didn't find what they were looking for, they either did without important information, or they're wasting even more time recreating files that have already been made. The files are somewhere, they just don't know where. That, my friends, is sad, and that is a huge waste of time and money. SharePoint makes it easy to find content. All of that may seem exciting until we think about how much work it might be. Fortunately, it's not more work. In fact, SharePoint can be less work. It's easier to use and it's more automated than working with email and network folders. Part of the reason is because SharePoint is made by Microsoft. Most of us use Microsoft Office applications. This often includes Outlook. The ability of SharePoint to connect with and use what's already in place, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook, your email inbox and calendars, the network servers and email accounts, make it easy to implement and seamless to use. During the series, I'll show you exactly how you're going to do that. The bottom line is that SharePoint provides a single, seamless way of unifying all of the data in your organization, providing a single way to create, save, access, share, and manage it that everyone with a browser and network connection can use with very little training. It's easy to implement, it's easy to use, it solves many of the challenges most companies find when using email and folder shares to try to manage information. If you didn't find that short list quite short enough, let's take a look at this. The much shorter definition. For us, as users of SharePoint, not administrators or designers or IT, SharePoint is simply a web-based platform that allows you to work with information in a way very similar to what you're used to, but that allows you to create, store, retrieve, collaborate, and share more easily. Remember that web means local network or internet, and information includes individual pieces of information as well as files. Beyond that, exactly what kinds of information you keep on SharePoint and how you use it is completely and uniquely up to you and your organization. The good news is, though, that once you learn how to create, retrieve, and work within SharePoint, no matter how simple or complex, large or small it is, the skills you need to use it are always the same. Okay, we get that SharePoint is going to optimize things, but exactly how is it going to do that? Let's take a look at what we know. The network, or maybe even just your hard drive. If I were to ask you what 2 things you can create in a folder on the network or on your hard drive, what would you say? Don't try to be too specific here. Generically speaking, what 2 things can you put in a folder? Well, you could create another folder, often called a subfolder, and if you want to get really antiquated, it used to be called a directory. Folders and subfolders help organize things. If we couldn't do that, then we'd have 1,000 different files just in one folder, like our My Documents folder, and that would be a mess. So at some point, we usually decide that we need to have folders within other folders to help us organize. The other thing we can put into a folder is an actual file. Yes, it could be Word or Excel or PowerPoint or a picture or a PDF, but they are all files, and they are all considered data. So in our My Documents folder, we might create a subfolder called Training. And inside that folder, we might need to organize our training documents, so we might create another subfolder called SharePoint 2013. In that folder, we might actually have a Word document called SharePoint 2013 Outline. Make sense? That's what we've been doing for about 2 decades now, placing individual files inside of folders and using folders to help us further organize our overall structure, hopefully into logical groups of information. This exact same concept is how SharePoint is organized too. The only 2 things you can create in a folder is a subfolder or a file. And the only 2 things that you can create as a user in SharePoint are sites and lists and libraries. A site for our discussion is the same as a folder. It's a structure or a container into which you can either place other sites or data. A special kind of site is known as a workspace. So if you hear that term, it's the same thing as a site. In SharePoint, data is stored in lists. Just like a special kind of site is a workspace, a special kind of list is a library. In our example here, lists and libraries are the same as files. Lists and libraries contain data in SharePoint. To keep things simple during this training, when I refer to sites, it could refer to sites or subsites or also workspaces. Likewise, when I say lists, we could also be talking about libraries. If there are any features that apply specifically to workspaces or libraries, I'll tell you. Now, following the original example of how you could have your My Documents folder with a folder in it called Training and a folder in that called SharePoint 2013 that finally had a file in it called SharePoint 2013 Outline, let's go ahead and see how that might look in SharePoint. We might have a site called Training. In that site, there might be a library called SharePoint 2013. And in that library, there might be a SharePoint 2013 Outline document, probably a Word document. So to review, SharePoint is exactly the same as your hard drive or network. Folders equal sites. Files are stored in lists or libraries. Again, we'll get into more detail about what a list and library is and how they're different from each other when we get to that particular topic later on. Hopefully, you now understand a little bit more about what SharePoint is. SharePoint is not a single thing, it's a collection of features and services. The primary goals of using it are collaboration, content management, information retrieval, and security. The expected benefits of using it are enhanced consistency and efficiency. Efficiency is increased for many reasons, including the fact that you can now find things faster. You can share things more quickly, and you can manage and secure information more easily too. We'll explore how all of this happens, but one big part of it is that we store files in a central location that everyone has access to, so we no longer have to waste time composing emails, sending attachments, and managing all of those copies. Efficiency is increased and frustration decreased, partly because SharePoint is just a website, and most of us these days know how to use a website by clicking hyperlinks, filling out fields, and clicking OK. Since it's also very similar to how our files and folders are currently organized, it all becomes simple and consistent. SharePoint sites, like any website, are composed of web pages that display information. Each SharePoint site can only contain sites and workspaces and lists and libraries. Sites and workspaces are like folders. They're used to organize things, and lists and libraries are like files. They are actual data. SharePoint allows us to continue to work in a way that is familiar and comfortable, but offers additional benefits and features that traditional file shares on the network or on our hard drive just can't provide.